we're fighting just for our land and for our freedom, despite the fact that all large cities of our country are now blocked. Nobody is going to enter and intervene with our freedom and country. And believe you me, every square of today, no matter what it's called, it's going to be called, as today, Freedom Square in every city of our country.
Translator on Vladimir Zelensky's speech this morning to the European Union that got a standing ovation. Tom Mulcair is standing by. Our segment brought to you by Guaranteed Industries. Your heating and air conditioning professionals, 514-342-3400, a Lennox, 3400 rather, a Lennox Premier dealer. Tom, you heard that impassioned plea, even from the translator, which is, perhaps even more difficult to hear. But we've heard from people there. We know the situation now. And I said this earlier in the afternoon. I know that Chrystia Freeland said today that more sanctions were coming, and she called Vladimir, for all intents and purposes, she said that history would deal with him. But my question is, as much as we're doing, and there's no, I don't think you can make the argument that Canada is not doing what it can. The argument is that these are going to take days, if not weeks, to materialize, in fact, in terms of supplying them with weaponry, et cetera. Yet it looks like the next 24 to 48 hours could determine their fate.
Well said. I think you're completely right, but you can't not do whatever you can, which is exactly what Canada's trying to do right now. We're trying. We don't have that much in the way of weaponry. We're a country of nearly 20 million square kilometers. We have 24 helicopters, 23 of which have cracks in the fuselage. We've completely neglected our own military, and now when everybody's trying to up the ante and see what they can offer to help Ukraine, we don't even have that much left in the cupboard to send them, but we'll do what we can. But we'll also have to take away a proper lesson from that we've got to stop neglecting our own military. Countries like Sweden, usually relatively neutral, Switzerland, always completely neutral institutionally, all stepping up to the plate and saying we're sending in whatever we can. So people are volunteering. They're going in from many countries. I don't know. You could be right, Aaron. It might be too late in a couple of days. But the world is watching. The international tribunal that takes care of these horrible crimes that we're seeing. When you start attacking civilians, you're committing a war crime. It's one thing for Putin to say that doesn't bother him, but anybody involved in his government will thereafter be the object of arrest warrants around the world. And they should be thinking about that, and it should be starting to give them pause, in addition to the fact that they haven't progressed nearly as much as they thought they could in this fight against Ukraine, which they considered a minor walk in the park. They'd send in their tanks, and the Ukrainians would simply fold their tents. Well, that's not at all the way it's happening, is it?
I read today that both Visa and MasterCard stopped processing transactions in Russia. Just a little earlier, Apple announced they would stop selling their products in Russia. You begin to wonder, I think at the beginning when we heard about these financial sanctions, Tom, we thought, well, okay, that's all well and good. It's something to say, but how much will that actually matter? But then I see lineups today. You can't use your credit card. You can't get money out of a bank. The ruble has gone down again today. How much impact is that likely to have inside of Russia?
A dictator is a dictator is a dictator. And he's held in place by an upper crust of oligarchs, very wealthy people who have become wealthy because they've been supporting Putin. Everything works that way in Russia right now. But the average Russian, who had seen their standard of living slowly but surely increase over the last 30 years, is now feeling directly the effects. He can't control that forever. There's so much bad feeling. Not only are people against the invasion of Ukraine, but they realize that the terrible side effects are hitting them first. Because if you can't buy anything and you can't get access to your money, then everybody is going to be stuck. I'll add to your list that you were talking about Visa and Apple and like Maersk, this massive international company that handles about 1/4 of all world trade on ships with containers. A massive company is saying we will not allow anything from our company to go into Russia anymore. That's huge, Aaron. And so I think that the Russians completely underestimated the reaction in the rest of Europe. Part of their thinking was they're a bunch of softies, that they talk a good game, they're never going to do anything. That's been proven wrong. They thought the Ukrainians would just roll over. That's been proven completely wrong. And now they're realizing that this is hitting the average Russian very hard. and there's going to be a day of reckoning, no question about it.
So do you think, because I think we were alerted today to the fact that talks will resume tomorrow, potential peace talks, you think there's a change now with all this stuff piling up against Putin, if you will, internally, never mind just what's going on in Ukraine, but the loss is there, but internally in his own country, that he's more likely to sit down and realize now that he can save face by making peace?
If we've learned one thing about Putin, he's not stable. We know that. I mean, this had been hinted at since his 1-hour speech, giving his own historical understanding of the fact that Ukraine didn't even exist, that it was just a sort of a sub-province of Russia, and they were just going and getting back what was rightfully theirs. Everyone who had watched that, and especially the people who followed it in the original Russian, said, look, he's not stable. This is not a man who's playing with a full deck. There's something wrong with Putin. This is not the sharp guy who seemed to be in charge of everything. He was meandering. It didn't make any sense. He held these bizarre meetings where he brought in his ministers, and they basically had to genuflect in front of him and tell him how great he was and how much they agreed with him, although some of them seemed to hesitate. And that's the reality that we're dealing with. We've got a very unstable leader. We don't know what he could actually do, but I do think that there are going to be smart people around him who are saying, boss, if we're sitting down tomorrow for another round of talks, we better put something on the table and show that we're willing to actually accomplish something, because this thing could spiral out of hand on us.
So let me just take this to another level, because I'm starting to hear some people weighing in on this. Geopolitically, does this take us back? Are we close to heading back into an era of the Cold War?
Well, this is what Putin was trying to do since the beginning, isn't it? He wanted to. It's like he wanted to go into overtime on the end of the Cold War. I mean, that was done largely. It was done under George H.W. Bush, but it was actually thanks to Ronald Reagan. You know, Mr. Gorbachev, take down this wall. The wall came down, and that time was a heady time where the West saw great hope for the future. A lot of people that knew the Russians said, "Keep an eye on them." You know, this is the way they play the game, and this is what we're seeing now. Is there any hope that out of all this something good could come? You always have to keep to that hope. I've only heard the Russians, by the way, say that there's more talks tomorrow. I have not, up until this time, I haven't heard the Ukrainians confirm it. But if there are more talks and they're being done in good faith, which is always a difficult thing when somebody's blowing up your country, but if we can use that term and say they actually are intent on sitting down and trying to work something, that would be good news for the world.
All right, let me move on from that and talk about Biden. Joe Biden makes his State of the Union address tonight, his first since becoming president. What are you expecting here, and how much of this do you think is devoted to what's going on in Ukraine right now?
Well, of course, this has been the bad luck of Joe Biden throughout his presidency. It's always been, one step forward and 3 steps back. He thought he was basically going to come in after the pandemic, and then there was another wave that washed across the country. He came up with a masterful plan that got everybody on side, and then he had one guy who owns coal mines who didn't like the bit about the carbon tax and was holding up $1.5 trillion in spending to stimulate the economy. And so this has been the bad luck of Biden. This was supposed to be his big reset, his speech where he would talk to Americans in a way that, they would understand that he's talking to the highest American ideals. Instead, the image of him is a guy who's completely alone, hunched over, walking across the lawn of the White House, not ever been able to pull people together. Kamala Harris, we don't see hide nor hair of her. This is supposed to be a dynamic duo. You put the president and the vice president together, and you can create some sort of synergy. 2 different generations that sort of come up with something. Instead, his disapproval rating is at 50%, and his approval rating is at a dismal 33%. I've never seen numbers like that before. Any thought that anybody might have had about a second term for him, I think, has been washed away. Is this speech going to make people feel a little bit better? Perhaps. But then again, he's not actually doing anything in Ukraine, is he? Everybody else is talking about it. Some of them are sending in a lot of weapons from their countries. The Americans, thus far, nothing.
Last thing I want to get to, Tom, close to home, Sylvain Gaudreau, who has been a veteran PQ M&A for many, many years, deciding to walk away. He's been in power, been elected ever since 2007. Any idea what's going on here? Is this a significant decision?
Well, he ran for the leadership back in the day, was defeated by Jean-François Lisée, and, was a loyal soldier, stuck it out, managed to win his seat again, even when Lisée gave the worst result that the PQ has ever had in its history. And, all that is part of history right now. I think Godot was in the early 50s. He was a prof before. He's going to go back to teaching. He's just throwing in the towel. He's fed up with it. And it's also going to be interpreted correctly, in my view, as the Parti Québécois just losing steam. the cause is being picked up on the progressive side by Quebec Solidaire. They say that they're sovereignist, as the other one was before, and everybody else in the PQ seems to be drifting over to François Legault. Some of them will drift over to Éric Duhaim's Conservatives. So I think this really is the end of the line. They have one last little hope. My friend and colleague Pierre Nantel, colleague both in politics and on the air, is running in the Marie-Victorin riding, which is basically the big Longueuil riding. And he's got a real chance of picking this up for the Parti Québécois. And if he does, well, that'll at least give them some hope heading into the election. But honestly, I think it's all over for the PQ.
All right. Tom, I thank you. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
All the best.